1000. What would you like to say, Chris?
Well, what I want to talk about is these illegal immigrants. They talk about giving them an amnesty. Now, if that filters out right the way through down to France, that means there's going to be like 50,000 supposed to be coming here this year, and you're going to get 100,000 plus and say, well, you gave them amnesty, so are we.
Yeah, I mean,
give us amnesty.
This is a mess, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolute chaos. I mean, where I live in South London, I was going down the road the other week, and I was wearing a poppy, and I was getting really, really dirty looks from people. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, what's going on in this country? It's a mess.
I think a lot of people feel that frustration. I mean, do you have any confidence in the government to sort it out with their emergency legislation this week?
Absolutely no. No, I wouldn't vote Conservative, which I've always been Conservative. I'd never, ever vote Labour. I would vote for reform, because we need something strong in this country.
OK. Chris, thanks very much for your thoughts. Steve is in Leicestershire and has given me a ring as well. Steve, what would you like to talk about?
Hi, Peter. Good to talk to you. Yeah, basically, everyone's talking about asking the question, including commentators on the radio, how do we stop the boats? How do we stop the boats? Well, it's obvious. These boats are big. They're not small boats. They're specialist boats. You can't just go and buy them on eBay. They're enormous boats. Now, why is the supply chain not being cut off? They must know where they're coming from.
Well, that is a big question. And the question is mainly for the French rather than us, isn't it?
Well, we're working with the French, aren't we?
Yeah, although, I mean, we're giving them a heck of a lot of money. I don't know if they're doing the job they're supposed to. They say that they stopped nearly 50. They say they stopped nearly 50% of the migrants who are trying to come over, which is hard to believe, I think, for some people.
Well, anyone with a brain knows that Macron can't afford to stop all the boats, because politically it would be suicide. The French won't stand for that. But if he shows he's stopping maybe 10, 20, 30 boats a week, he can say to us, we've stopped 30 boats this week. Yeah. And to the French people, he can't stop 100% of them, otherwise he'd be voted out, because they won't tolerate it. Yeah. So it's never going to happen.
Listen, I think a lot of people feel that frustration, Steve. I think a lot of people agree with you, and thank you very, very much indeed for your thoughts. That was Steve in Leicestershire. Anthony is in Manchester. I think you're a new caller, Anthony. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yes, Peter, regarding these hate marches. Now, here's the thing. At least 90% of these marchers are not even British, Peter.
How do you know that's 90%? Where are you getting that from?
Well, I'll tell you where I get my figures from, yeah? I'll tell you where I get the 90% from.
Sure.
Only Philistines, the culturally brain dead, and Muslims say they're British just because they're born in this country.
What, so hold on a second, Anthony. Just let me just get it clear in my head. Are you saying that someone who's born here who happens to be a Muslim isn't British?
No, what I'm saying is this. Just because you're born in this country doesn't make you British.
What is British? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by being British?
Well, I'll just explain it to you. Britishness, British culture and British values have not been taught in British schools for 60 years. And it's not been taught in British universities for 70 years. Now, bear with me. That's why we live in a nation of cultural and political Philistines. Now, if I was to say to you, are you British, you wouldn't understand the question.
Well, let me understand the question. I promise you I want to hear you, but we also got to go to the President of the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus in a second. But what is being British to you? What are British values, Anthony?
Well, if you're culturally British, your values are the 10 Commandments, Peter. Now, that's not been taught in British schools.
I don't think that's true, Anthony. I know lots of British people.
Well, that's a fact.
I mean, it's not. Sorry, Anthony, it's not. No, Anthony.
Because you're born in this country doesn't make you British. Only Philistine would say such a thing.
Okay, Anthony, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, because I know lots of people who are as British as Finchley, Anthony, who are as British as Finchley, who don't agree with the 10 Commandments, for example.
Think just because you're born in this country that makes you British. Is that what you actually believe?
Yes.
You're a Philistine.
Okay, Anthony, thanks for that. I will happily be in my Philistinism, if that is a word. And David, you're very welcome. Good morning. What point would you like to make, not just to me, but also to Benedict and Peter?
Yes, good morning, Peter, and Benedict and Peter as well. The Chancellor has said there's been conversations about the people that are unemployed and that they should work and sanctions and all this. So that's where the conversation I want to go. And let's look at a real-world example. Let's look at somebody who's doing 35 hours a week and happens to be between the ages of 18 to 20. Now, that equates to something like £13,290 a year after tax. If we take that same individual...
If they're on the minimum wage?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So if we bring them up to 23 and over, age-wise, that brings them up to 16,918. So that's a massive difference. I mean, I work for the Citizens Advice Bureau, and we constantly see people, 16 is very unlikely, but certainly that 18 to 20 bracket, we constantly see them, because that 3,500 odd pound, £600 odd
it's a lot of money
a year. It's a lot of money. And when you look at rent and all these kind of things, young people today are just struggling and can't work.
David, let me ask you, you work in the Citizens Advice Bureau. Mm-hmm. What happens with universal credit then? Does that top up their income? Tell me how that works for those people.
Well, you're talking, let's say, £480 a month. You know, and then with the rules that is brought in with the housing benefits, too complicated to go into it, but they don't get full housing benefit. Yeah, and in Scotland, for instance, what they've done is that the Scottish Government has subsidised the councils to top that up further.
So what do you think should happen, David? I mean, you're the coalface here. What do you think should happen to help those people and to make life easier? Yeah,
straight off the back, Peter, without any of this fudging or anything, anybody who's, let's say 18, let's start at that. 16 might be too much of an argument, but let's say over 18, you all get paid the same. You get paid £10.42 an hour. Anybody who's over 18 to 20 gets paid £7.49 an hour. And I think that's disgraceful in this
David, stay with us, stay where you are. I want to put that to Peter Edwards and Benedict Spence. Benedict, first of all, what do you think about what David in Glasgow has said there?
I mean, it's difficult because I suppose when you sort of put it in those terms, I assume David's talking about Scotland necessarily. Yeah. I can only sort of look at things through the prism of where I'm based, which is London and East Anglia, and it's just not enough to live on is the thing. I mean, obviously people earn more in sort of more affluent areas sort of as a baseline, but I think that it does really sort of throw into relief actually what it is that young people are sort of starting off on, which is something that isn't you're not able to live on. But I mean, really speaking, this is why I suppose once we look at the current tax burden, and we look at how heavy it is, and that needs to go towards all sorts of services, it's why it's very important, I think, that we do need to look at other ways of freeing up wealth and creating more wealth. And this is why I think Jeremy Hunt has a very difficult time, because of course he wants to lower taxes in order to sort of jumpstart growth, which has flatlined since the last financial crisis. The Tories have had an awful record, actually, since the last financial crisis on creating wealth. He wants to do that, and it means tough choices, and it does mean, I think, that actually the government needs to cut its cloth. But let's also be very clear, it's why I think you're not seeing Keir Starmer promising the earth. It's why he's being very conservative on what it is that he's promising. Well, let's get the Labour perspective
from Peter Edwards. What do you make of what David said and what Benedict said?
Well, it's very painful to hear, and I'm 42, but imagine being 22 today, it being incredibly tough. There's one measure which I don't think Labour are about to announce because it'd be so expensive that would adjust these things, and that would be just raise the minimum wage, but that would be a cost for both the private sector and the public sector, so I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. But let me engage with one particular example that's painful. Housing, there is this stat about multiples. It used to be buying your first home was a certain multiple of your salary. It's gone up and up and up. Buying your first home, which of course is good for you in the long run because you're putting money into owning your own house rather than paying rent to someone else, that's got further and further away. Wages haven't kept pace with inflation. It's hard to chart a way out of it. These are kind of generational things rather than things you can just pass the law.
That any chancellor can just sort out on Wednesday.
The housing point is very important because it's going to take a government to actually ride roughshod over its own special interests. The Tories don't build houses because Tory voters vote against it, but so do Lib Dems, so do Greens, and actually a lot of Labour voters at a local level.
We want lots of new houses. We want lots of new houses, just not here. Yeah. David, what do you make of what the two gents have said this morning?
Every time I sit down with somebody who's aged 18 to 20 and we work out their incomings and outgoings, every single one of them says that if they get paid $10.42 an hour, the choice of work would be a no-brainer. What we have to understand is if we're passing this burden, this increase in salary onto the employers. The two commentators there said, it's going to be difficult and all this kind of stuff.
They're right though.
Well, yes, but what we also have to understand is then the flip side of the coin comes is if young people can't get paid enough, then they start going on to universal credits, or they have to start claiming benefits.
And that's actually
coming out of the tax ban.
So
the thing is, a no-win. I would like to see today people being independent. Let's not pay them the tax. Let them work. And it's the same argument constantly with employers. Every time that the minimum wage goes up, they can't afford it. A few months later, everything's okay. So
it's funny. It's funny how every time the minimum wage goes up, that argument is had, and also when the minimum wage was brought in as well. There was all those arguments. You hear them all the time. David, thank you.
Cost 1 million jobs, we were told.
That's right, which was not true. We were also told that Brexit would kill the City of London, which it didn't. Thank you, George Osborne, for scaring us all completely incorrectly. The second worst Chancellor in our country's history after Kwasi Kwarteng. David in Glasgow, thank you very much indeed. Chaz in Gloucestershire has been waiting patiently. Chaz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that one of the ways we can deal with the invasion from the European socialist dictatorship, as I now call the EU, the ESD, is to make them pay for it. And
how do we do that, Chaz? How does that work?
Well, we were conned into agreeing to pay huge amounts of money to the Brussels bullies when we got our freedom, decided we'd take our freedom. They're keeping us now imprisoned by keeping us within their rules, which means, as far as I'm concerned, they are now the enemy.
But now we have our own illegal migration bill. There's going to be emergency legislation on Rwanda this week. Is the government not at least attempting to tackle this?
No, I don't think they are. The problem is that if we are going to take the money out of the money that we promised them, to say before we pay them a single penny, all that money will be put towards what it costs us to deal with the invasion.
Stay where you are, Chaz. I'm going to put that to Peter Edwards. What do you think of that plan, Peter?
Chaz, I don't agree, and we'll have our disagreements in politics, but I think using words like dictatorial and invasion is really wide of the mark, especially when there are actual wars going on in Europe and around the world at the moment. I mean, I think Brexit has been a disaster, and I think the economic pain is only just beginning, so I think this will take 20 or 30 years to really flush out. The real curiosity in what you said was a point about the Brexit deal, where, of course, Boris Johnson negotiated a deal, was thrown out of office, and then ended up, I think, campaigning against his own deal from the backbenches. The point from that is not party political. The point is Brexit is a lot more convoluted and intractable than we've realised yet.
Benedict?
Well, the problem...
Hold on a second, Charles. I just want to get Benedict's thought, then I promise I'll come back to you. Benedict.
The issue... Peter touched on it slightly. It wasn't his point, but he did sort of allude to it. The issue that I have is not Europe, and it's never been Europe. It is domestic politics. It is the attitude of politicians in this country. It's all very well sort of trying to paint Brussels as the enemy, if you want, but Brussels is, of course, going to act in its own self-interest. It has to. That's what we want from our own politicians. The issue that we have, and the reason why I believe actually most people voted for Brexit, was not because they are xenophobes or anything like that. It is because of an understanding that there is a lack of political control or will in this country. It is almost like it's sort of on autopilot towards a destination that we're not entirely sure that we like. And that, I'm afraid, Boris Johnson, as much as he sort of portrayed himself as the great Brexit battler, he was as much a part of that issue as anybody else. Until you have a fundamental change in attitude amongst politicians and civil servants in the UK, you can't expect things to change if they're expecting things to just sort of carry on as they did before Brexit. And this was a mistake a lot of Brexiteers have made, thinking just because you won the referendum that everything will just magically turn out fine. And now look where we are. Lots of Brexiteers are very unhappy at the current makeup of the cabinet, and that's entirely their fault.
Let's hear from Chaz. Chaz, I promised I'd come back to you. What do you think of what Benedict and Peter have just said?
Well, I think they're assuming that we are not, in effect, at war with the Brussels bullies. These people.
I mean, we're not at war with them. It's a political battle, but it's not a war like Gaza or Ukraine.
Yeah, but they don't want to let us go. They are aiding and abetting these people who come across on the boats. We know that because if the French press are able to be there and take pictures of the boats leaving, Why aren't the French police there able to be there to stop them?
It's a very, very good point.
Huge amounts of money, which they're not spending.
Well, we're giving them a lot of money, Charles, as you correctly point out. So, Charles in Gloucestershire, thank you. Charlotte is in Berkshire. She wants to talk about migration. 0344 499 1000 is the number she has called. Charlotte, you've been waiting patiently. What would you like to say this morning? Good morning to you.
Good morning, and yes, thank you for having me on. The point I want to make is this migration issue is obviously very emotive, and the British people are clearly very concerned about it. But my point is, we were able to lock down the country for 2 years, but we can't sort migration out.
Yeah.
I actually think, in all honesty, this is not actually by accident. I think this is actually by design. And I don't know who the powers that be are, but I think that the mass immigration, illegal immigration, is deliberate.
Why do you think that? What's your evidence for that?
I don't have evidence, but I think you can look at the boats and you can look at who's coming into our country, and they are all fighting age men. Yes, there are women and children on there, but the vast majority are fighting age men. And also, they say we can't deport these people. Why not? Australia were able to resolve their issue very quickly, and I cannot believe we can't do it ourselves. If there is the political will to do this, they should be able to get it done. And let's face it, Rishi Sunak, he is so far behind. If he really wanted to resolve this, he could. And the one person who was potentially going to do that, he got rid of her. So I'm not entirely certain who's in charge of this country, but I really do genuinely believe that they could sort this illegal immigration out. We're going over to France and picking them up and bringing them over.
Charlotte, I think a lot of people will agree with what you say, and there's another report today in the Sunday Times. Home Office ministers considering granting an effective amnesty to migrants who've arrived in Britain illegally and have been left in limbo. This is tens of thousands of people since the illegal migration bill, which came through, now the Illegal Migration Act, which came into force in July. The Act imposed a duty on the Home Secretary to remove them without considering their asylum claims, but there are these people who then think, oh, well, we'll give them an effective amnesty because the immigration experts are apparently saying ministers could be in breach of the United Nations Refugee Convention because the asylum seekers are being held, in some cases in detention centres, indefinitely.
Yeah, and then there's another point on this. So we're obviously seeing all these pro-Palestinian people protesting week in, week out, and we seem to be powerless to actually stop it. Rightly or wrongly, everyone has a right to protest, and that I think this is actually quite abhorrent, and it clearly goes completely against the culture of our country. But one of the excuses that is used that we can't actually send these people back is we don't know where they've come from. We've got streets of people shouting pro-Palestinian chants.
And of course, some of them are born in this country, Charlotte. They're not all migrants.
Yeah. No, I agree. But you're telling me that we really genuinely don't know where all these people have come from. I don't believe it. I really don't.
It just feels it feels to me, I can sense your frustration, Charlotte, and it just seems like a country out of control.
Well, the thing is, I work in London, and I've been commuting in and out of London for many, many years, and I've never really felt unsafe. I used to live in London. I genuinely don't feel comfortable going in and out of London anymore. And one of my children is an air cadet. They've been told this week they are no longer allowed to go in their uniform because they are at risk.
That's just complete capitulation, isn't it? That is just being scared of what might happen. It's terrible that they feel they have to do that. But you know, if we live in fear, that's no way to live.
Yeah, and someone said to me, rather than actually hiding the uniform, we should get more uniform out on the streets. We should get the military uniform out and be proud.
Well, look at how the Americans, they have discounts for people in uniform in different restaurants. They do all sorts of things for people who serve their country in the military. Charlotte, great call. Give me another call at some stage in the future. I'd love to hear from you again. Really, really interesting points there. I expect we'll get some more from Sarah in West Sussex, who's giving me a call as well, 0344 499 1000. Sarah, what would you like to say this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, Peter. You and I have Jewish friends, and I have been collating since the actual massacre on the 7th of October the increase in anti-Semitic posts that are online, and I'm either sending these to the CAA, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, who made the video, or to the CST, which is a Community Security Trust.
Yeah, though they're both excellent organisations. We're going to be talking to the Director of Investigations at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism just a little bit later this hour, actually.
Yes, and I'll be on the march on the 26th of November as well.
Excellent. Tell us about that. Give us the details of what, if you have them to hand. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but give us the details on the 26th.
Well, the 26th, all we know at the moment is you're given the information a bit closer to the time.
Yes.
It's Sunday the 26th. I think it's 1:30 and it's meeting in Parliament Square, I think.
Right.
That's the only information I have. But as you're going to be speaking to somebody from the CAA,
we'll get the full information from them.
Yeah.
But there's so much stuff online, Sarah, so much anti-Semitic stuff. I've got 0.0001% of what some people have got, but certainly I did quite a fractious interview last Saturday with someone who is pro-Palestinian, and it got a bit heated, and certainly some of the stuff I received was just awful. And you're really, I don't actually want to repeat it, but you can imagine what it was, because you've seen it all, Sarah.
I have. And the other thing, when it got to one point where they're cartoons, I mean, but doesn't really matter. But the depiction in them was so vile. I thought, I don't think I can actually send this.
Yeah.
Because you're just thinking, oh my goodness, this has got to be. I've got to send it, because that's the level we've actually been.
And you sort of question, Sarah, who. I mean, I just thought about. I'm not making this all about me at all, but I'm just saying from my personal experience, having received quite a lot of messages, including on Instagram, I was just thinking, what goes through the minds of people that someone they've never met, they probably never will meet, that they're going to send them this information or comment on Facebook or whatever people do, to say, actually, you support killing babies, or you are, or much worse stuff, and personal criticism and all the rest of it. What goes through the minds of those people, Sarah?
It is impossible to understand. I think on some level they just operate automatically, if you sort of mean. They're fed the rhetoric, they repeat the rhetoric, they don't actually do it with any conscious thought. There is no critical analysis whatsoever. The 7th of October massacre is almost forgotten, and this constant it is absolutely horrendous what the civilian population in Palestine is going through. But when the placards, I want to go along and put Free Palestine and add from Hamas underneath.
Well, exactly. And you're absolutely right. And someone actually held up a sign saying, Hamas are terrorists, or along those lines. And it was pulled down. Sarah, you're doing great work there. Continue doing it. And Sarah's right. Sarah's not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. But we've got to stand with our Jewish friends. We've got to make sure we can do all we can do to stand with people who are victims of hatred. And that's anybody from any background. It is not okay. Alison is in Hastings. I think it's Benedict's comments on Brexit you want to talk about, Alison. You're very welcome to the programme. Good morning.
Hello, Peter. Yes, I did take exception to something that I think Benedict Spence said, unless I misunderstood. He seemed to have this throwaway line that, those of us who voted for Brexit, it's all our fault that it's all going wrong. Well, I and everyone I know who voted for Brexit did so to take power away from unelected EU officials and put it back into the hands of our elected politicians in Westminster. And we did that assuming that they would relish the opportunity to take the reins of power and actually govern. And they haven't, have they? They just haven't done it.
I think a lot of people are as disappointed as you, Alison.
Yeah, I am really disappointed. In fact, I had lunch with a very close friend who voted Remain, and we've remained friends. And she asked me recently, she said, are you happy with the way things are going? If we had a referendum again, would you vote the same way? And I said, well, I would vote the same way for the same reasons I voted for it in the first place, because I think the EU is fundamentally undemocratic. But no, I'm not happy with the way things are going.
This is not the Brexit you voted for, Alison.
No, because I think, because we've had, 30, 40 years of being able to just say, well, Brussels decides this, Brussels decides that. I think they've actually forgotten how to govern. They don't know how to do it. And the other thing, of course, that people forget, I think, is that we have a massively Remain biased civil service who are not helping. They're not going to help or make suggestions as to how things could be done better. You know, they obstruct, they delay anything that anyone tries to do to make
some of them do, Alison. I worked with the civil service for 3.5 years. There's undoubtedly, London is a remain city. There are undoubtedly people like that, but not all of them. I will slightly defend them, Alison.
No, I agree. And there was a very interesting letter in the paper a couple of days ago from an anonymous civil servant who said that, people like him who try to do things properly are very frustrated because, there is this faction in the civil service that don't want Brexit to work. And funnily enough, the morning after the referendum, I went into work and I spoke to a colleague who was in tears because Brexit had won. And I remember saying to her...
Get over yourself, love.
Well, apart from that, I said not a Democrat then, but then after I said that, I said, don't worry, love, the powers that be will never let it happen.
Interesting.
And, I'm not saying I'm cleverer than anyone else,
no.
But it was always there, that possibility, and we had all those years of trying to overturn the referendum. Let's remind everyone that Keir Starmer tried to overturn it. He was the architect of the second referendum, the people's referendum. I don't know who voted the first time.
I think it was probably the people, Alison, voted for it. I think that was the people's referendum. It's funny you mention that. I mean, people who cry over that, and American students were given the day off because of the trauma that President Trump had been elected. And so, I mean, just get over yourself. I don't think I worked in politics. Like, politics was my life for 3.5 years. I don't think I cried over anything. I cried over my boss getting cancer, and that was a horrible day. But I mean, just honestly, these people take themselves so seriously, don't they, Alison?
Like it's the end, literally the end of the world. Isn't it? And you can't. I mean, democracy is democracy. If the referendum had gone the other way, I would have been upset, but I'd have accepted it.
You'd have got on with it, and you wouldn't have been hammered. You wouldn't have been hammered for the next few years by people saying there should be a second referendum. No, we are a democracy, unlike other democracies like Ireland, for example, that said on numerous twice actually, both Lisbon and the Nice treaties. Oh, you've got the wrong result. We'll have to have a second referendum. Alison, great call. I could talk to you all day, but unfortunately I've got to move on. But Grant has called for the first time. You're very welcome, Grant. What point would you like to make here on TalkTV?
Morning, Peter. Thank you for having me on. I just want to put a different point of view towards what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I've been reading quite a bit about the Israeli position, but it's from the right-wing side. Mm-hmm. And the way things are going, or the way things perceived are going, is Israel is slowly wiping Gaza out. They're pushing the Gaza Palestinians towards the Rafah Gate. What I've heard quite a few Jewish people say is that the Gaza Strip is a thorn in their side, and what they want to do is push the Gaza Palestinians into Egypt. They'll then close the gate, say welcome to Israel, wipe out the Gaza Strip, and make it Israel.
I mean, they did withdraw voluntarily in 2005, although it's interesting that Netanyahu certainly has talked about the security situation, or Israel involvement in the security situation in Gaza when this war or conflict or whatever you want to call it is over. So, I mean, there is some possible thought in that. The thing is that Egypt won't accept every single person in Gaza. That's just not going to happen.
No, definitely. But again, I've read both sides of it a bit. Yeah. And from what I understand, the countries don't want to take the Palestinians because everybody's terrified that once the Gaza Palestinians especially get pushed out, it's then going to be a humanitarian aid thing because they're coming literally with nothing, the stuff on their back.
Well,
they're lucky.
I think it's a humanitarian crisis already. Grant, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate that. Don't make it the last call to us, but good first call. Susan is in West Sussex. Hello, Susan. How are you doing? Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Peter. I've waited a long time, but
well, I hope it's worth the wait, Susan. Make your point.
Yeah, you're a lovely lad, you are.
Oh, it's very kind.
Listening to all the people that I've been waiting, I've heard about 4, and all which such sad. But the last one, talking about the homeless, it's not what I wanted to speak about, but I feel so sad for all these people that can't afford their rent and can't afford to eat, and now we've got all these immigrants coming over, and why don't we look after our own people?
I think a lot of people will chime with that thought, Susan.
Well, we've got so many people. What with the climate change and the heating and the food and the inflation, and we should look after our own people.
It's a very tough time for a lot of people, and a lot of people feel that the state, the things we pay tax for, just aren't working for us. People can't get a GP's appointment. They can't get a school place sometimes.
But the government over the years have allowed all this immigration to take hold. They've allowed it. I mean, Labour wanted it because they thought they would get votes. And now they brought all, and we've got all these marches with all these Palestinians, and our Jewish families are so frightened.
For that, Michael is in Swansea, and Michael, you've an interesting point to make. What would you like to say? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Well, it's this whole thing in this UK and generally worldwide of labelling people and policies left-wing and right-wing. It just seems to be simplistic. Rubbish.
Is it too lazy?
Yeah, I mean, for example, if you were for Brexit, which I was, then you're right-wing. Well, that's just... I know I'm just for Brexit.
I'll tell you who else was for Brexit, Michael. Jeremy Corbyn. He won't ever tell you he was, but he absolutely hates the EU.
But
he's certainly not right-wing.
No, but I mean... Well, OK, that's fair enough. But generally, right-wing, when you say someone's right-wing, it almost smacks of, like, Nazism. And if you're left-wing, you're self-righteous and for the downtrodden, which obviously I am. And it just the whole labelling of people in this simplistic way is just, it doesn't help complex problems, really.
People want to put labels on other people, though, don't they? They certainly... And also, what I found interesting was that every single person who came... There were some in the media, not me, I should add, there were some in the media that labelled basically everybody who came to, as some people would put it, guard the cenotaph, show solidarity with their veterans or whatever, far-right activists. I'm sure some of them were, but how can you know that everybody there was far-right, votes for, the National Front or the BNP or whoever? You don't know that, and I think that sometimes the media are a little bit too keen to label people, as are people in society as well, Michael, so it's a really good point.
And it's just insulting. For example, I was talking to someone recently, a friend, and I said, I'm not happy people arriving illegally in the boats, which the fact they're arriving illegally says it all. And I was called a racist. Well, I'm not a racist.
Nonsense.
But I mean, it's because I want everyone to come here. And obviously, I'm quite happy to help people that arrive legally.
But there are people, Michael, sorry to interrupt you, Michael, but you're absolutely bang on. And there are people who, let's shut down the entire conversation on immigration, which we should have, and we have on the station all the time, but let's shut it down completely simply by, throwing the word racist at you. Ludicrous.
That's right. And it's the same, it seems to be the same thing in, there's a populist government being elected. They're right-wing, obviously, and obviously right-wing's wrong if you're left-wing. It doesn't help things.
Well, it also feeds into, just to talk about right-wing and left-wing again, Michael, it feeds into the old thought that the right think the left are stupid, but the left think the right are morally wrong.
Well, yeah, that's right. Can't we just meet somewhere in the middle?
Well, let's try to. Let's keep having the conversation here on this show. Michael, thank you very much indeed. Great points made by Michael in Swansea there of the week. John is in Newcastle. I think wants to talk about the Rwanda plan as well. John, what would you like to say? Good afternoon to you.
Right, sir. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this, our real fantasy island. Yes, a few days ago on your channel, there was a chap being interviewed, and I was amazed to understand that if they sent one person to Rwanda, it would be the equivalent to having them in this hotel, an average hotel mind, in this country for 12 years. Well, I find it fantastic to believe anyway.
It's so expensive, and we've spent 140 million on it already.
And may I say, there's a chap called Lee Anderson, he's a Conservative MP.
Yeah.
He said from his first day as an MP, he wanted them to return to France. Is France a war-torn country? No. Is France at war? No. Is France... It's got civil war? No.
And the law is... you're absolutely right, John. And the law is that you're meant to seek asylum in the country, the first safe country you come to. So, that is France.
Yeah. So why do we have them here? And I go to France every year on holiday, to be honest, and I'm amazed at how advanced it is to us. But anyway, that's by the by. We've got a man called, I call him Risky Sunak, and because he can talk the talk, he's a very good talker. I heard him on this rare occasion where I listened to this Prime Minister's question time thing. And he's a very good talker, I'll give him that.
But does he actually take risks, John? That's my question.
Yeah, he talks the talk, he doesn't walk the walk, and that's the major thing. I really think that that's the situation. And David Cameron is a man. When he was the Prime Minister, he made in, to China. He was getting some information of China as if they can do business. It failed. Yeah. He failed when it came to Brexit. He gave the people of this country a chance, a democratic chance to vote. And of course they did, and he was a Remainer, and of course it went against him, and then he packed it in. I've got no time for this man either. Okay. And really, he talks about foreign aid. This is what I've heard in the last week. Foreign aid, that's what he's on about. What about British aid? What about hundreds and hundreds, in fact thousands of our own people? Where I live, there's one food bank. Now there's 7.
Yeah,
I think children undernourished.
John, I know exactly what you're saying. I think a lot of people will agree.
We need reform. We need reform in this country. I would never vote Tory. I'll never vote in Labour. Look at the false Labour's and it hasn't even gotten into power yet. And Labour and the Liberals, they've never been in for over 100 years themselves.
Well, they were part of the coalition, of course, John, but you're absolutely right. They haven't been in power overall in this country. We've got to leave it there, John, but listen, thank you very much. You speak a lot of sense.